My family has always been proud of tradition, a long-established boutique bank, a son to inherit, and a daughter who knows when to be quiet. I, their daughter, am the one they mention last, if they remember to mention me at all. I work at a used bookstore. It sounds ordinary, but that's just the surface. They don't know that behind the dusty books, I'm running a secret tech company worth billions of euros, the very company they themselves will have to kneel and beg for help from. The scent of beeswax and aging paper clung to me like a second skin, a comforting shroud against the world outside the narrow, cobbled streets of the Latin Quarter. Here, within the quiet, slightly dusty confines of the old pages, I was Élodie Dubois, assistant manager, purveyor of forgotten stories bound in leather and time. It was a role I inhabited with practiced ease, a simple, unassuming existence that fit the narrative my family had long since written for me. Simple, unambitious, safe, utterly, suffocatingly wrong. Tonight, however, the scent of old books was replaced by the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume and the metallic tang of unspoken resentments. Sunday dinner at the Dubois family estate in the 16th district, a ritual as predictable as was soul-crushing. The chandelier above the long, polished mahogany table dripped crystal light onto porcelain plates and heavy silverware, illuminating the carefully constructed facade of familial harmony. My father, Mr. Dubois, sat at the head, his posture rigid, his gaze sweeping over the table with the air of a man surveying his domain. His domain, built on the diminishing prestige of Dubois and Sons, the family's boutique investment bank, felt increasingly like a gilded cage built on shaky foundations. Opposite him, my mother, Mrs. Dubois, offered faint, strained smiles, her eyes occasionally flitting towards me with a mixture of pity and helplessness that only twisted the knife deeper. And then there was Antoine, my older brother, heir apparent, currently holding court, regaling my father with exaggerated tales of a groundbreaking merger he was supposedly orchestrating. His voice boomed with manufactured confidence, masking the desperation I knew lurked beneath. The preliminary talks were incredibly promising, Father, Antoine declared, swirling his burgundy in its glass. They see the value, the legacy of Dubois and Sons. It just requires a strategic injection of capital, a modernization push. My father nodded, a rare flicker of pride warming his usually stern features. Excellent, Antoine. Tradition is paramount, but we must adapt. Show them the Dubois strength. I focused on meticulously cutting my filet mignon, the knife scraping softly against the china. Silence was my shield, observation my weapon. I saw the slight tremor in Antoine's hand as he lifted his glass, the way his eyes avoided meeting anyone's for too long. I knew, through channels he couldn't even fathom, that his promising talks were stalling, that Dubois and Sons was bleeding capital, drowning in outdated practices, while nimbler firms danced circles round it. Inevitably, the spotlight turned. My father cleared his throat. And you, Élodie, how fares the world of dusty volumes? The condescension was woven into the fabric of his tone, subtle yet sharp. I offered a polite, empty smile. Busy, Father. We received a rare first edition of Voltaire this week. Quite exciting for the collectors. I kept my voice level, my gaze steady. Years of practice had taught me to build impenetrable walls around my true self in their presence. Antoine chuckled, a dismissive, grating sound. Voltaire, how quaint. He leaned forward, addressing the others at the table, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. At least Élodie has found a hobby to occupy her time. Sorting books. It's important work, I suppose, even if nobody truly cares about those old relics anymore. The familiar heat rose in my chest, a burning ember of long-nursed fury. Relics, the word hung in the air, aimed not just at the books, but at me, the daughter who refused the prescribed path law school rejected, art history abandoned. The daughter who, in their eyes, amounted to nothing more than a quaint, irrelevant footnote in the Grand Dubois saga. Perhaps, my father added, his voice heavy with disappointment, if you applied that diligence to learning from Antoine, or perhaps finding a suitable husband, your time would be better spent. Élodie, a woman of your lineage, he trailed off, letting the unspoken judgment fill the space. Shouldn't be wasting her life in a shop. My hand tightened around the silver fork beneath the heavy linen napkin. The tines pressed into my palm, a small, sharp pain that angered me. I could feel the familiar weight of their collective disapproval settling upon me. A suffocating cloak I'd worn for years. They saw the quiet assistant manager, the spinster sister, the family disappointment. They had no idea. Let them think that. A cold voice whispered inside me. Let them underestimate. Let them wallow in their ignorance. The ember of fury didn't die. It pulsed, feeding a resolve forged in years of quiet rebellion and simmering resentment. I lifted my chin slightly, meeting my father's gaze with a carefully blank expression. The shop keeps me occupied, father, and I find the work fulfilling. The conversation moved on, leaving me adrift in my bubble of forced composure. But beneath the surface, the currents were shifting. The years of being dismissed, patronized, actively mocked for my early, fumbling interest in technology, childish tinkering, my father had called it, not suitable for a Dubois woman, had not broken me. They had forged me. Flashback. I was 19, excitedly showing my father and Antoine a rudimentary algorithm I'd coded, designed to predict microtrends in luxury goods based on social media chatter. Antoine had snatched the laptop, laughing. Look at this nonsense, father. Élodie thinks she's going to predict fashion with numbers. My father had shaken his head, his voice laced with weary exasperation. Élodie, please, focus on your law studies. This is a distraction. Unbecoming, the sting of that dismissal, the casual cruelty of their laughter, had never truly faded. Now, the unbecoming distraction was Oratech, my creation, built from scratch in the vibrant, chaotic ecosystem of Station F, the world's largest startup campus, a universe away from the stuffy traditions of the 16th district. Oratech, a bleeding-edge biotech and fintech hybrid, operated from sleek, minimalist offices in Paris, London, and Berlin. Its valuation was astronomical, its influence quietly reshaping industries my family couldn't even comprehend. And I, Élodie Dubois, the bookshop assistant, was its anonymous founder and CEO. The contrast was jarring, almost schizophrenic. Later that evening, after escaping the oppressive atmosphere of the family dinner, I stood in my real office at Station F. The space buzzed with quiet energy, screens glowed with complex data streams, and the air crackled with innovation. Gone was the dowdy skirt and blouse. I wore tailored trousers and a sharp blazer, my hair pulled back efficiently. My co, Jean-Pierre, a brilliant man I'd had hunted from a Swiss firm, was waiting. Madame Dubois, he greeted me, his tone respectful, professional. Here, I wasn't Élodie, I was the boss. The Berlin team finalized the acquisition projection. The London investors are confirmed for the call at 0800 tomorrow, and the final tranche of funding for Project Chimera cleared an hour ago. Excellent, Jean-Pierre, I replied, my voice crisp, authoritative. We spent the next hour dissecting market analytics, making multi-million euro decisions, strategizing moves that would ripple across international markets. Here, my intellect wasn't quaint. It was sought after, respected, powerful. This was my true domain, built not on inherited legacy, but on grit, vision, and relentless hard work. The secrecy had initially been a shield, born from a deep-seated mistrust after an early betrayal of former fiancé who'd feigned interest in my ideas only to try and leverage my family name ironically, the very name I now downplayed for his own gain. That experience had taught me the corrosive nature of unearned privilege and the transactional relationships it fostered. I wanted to build something real, something judged on merit alone. I wanted to know who my real allies were, but over time, fueled by my family's persistent, stinging disdain, the shield had morphed into something else, a weapon in waiting. Their blindness wasn't just an annoyance anymore. It was an insult that demanded correction. The initial desire to simply prove them wrong, to find genuine connection, had curdled under the acid rain of their judgment. It had become a colder, harder thing, and meticulously plan retribution. I wouldn't just show them they were wrong. I would make them need the very thing they despised. I would make them come crawling to the quaint little sister in her unbecoming distractions. The breaking point, the moment the simmering resentment boiled over into active planning, came a few weeks later. The annual spring ball, a highlight of the Parisian social calendar, a glittering affair crawling with the city's old money elite. Naturally, the Dubois family would be there in full force. I, however, hadn't received an invitation. An oversight, perhaps, unlikely. More probable was Antoine, deliberately forgetting to pass it along, ensuring the family presented a united, respectable front without the awkward presence of the bookish spinster sister. It stung, but it was expected. What wasn't expected was running into them. I was attending as the guest of Dr. Lena Hansen, a brilliant biochemist, or tech was collaborating with a woman whose intellect shone brighter than any diamond necklace in the room, and who moved entirely outside the suffocating orbit of Parisian high society. We were discussing gene sequencing near the champagne fountain when I saw them, my father, mother, and Antoine, holding court with a circle of acquaintances. Antoine spotted me first. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a smug, condescending smirk. He steered his group towards us, his voice loud enough to carry. Lena, good evening, he greeted Dr. Hansen, barely acknowledging her before turning his full attention to me, his eyes sweeping over my simple, elegant, but not designer-label black dress. Well, Élodie, fancy seeing you here. Taking a break from the dust, his friends chuckled politely. My father offered a curt nod, his expression unreadable but implicitly disapproving. My mother looked distinctly uncomfortable, wringing her hands slightly. I'm here with Dr. Hansen, I replied evenly, refusing to show the wave of humiliation and anger washing over me. Antoine waved a dismissive hand. Yes, science, very noble. He then leaned in conspiratorially towards his friends, his voice a stage whisper that carried perfectly. This is my little sister, Élodie. She has a passion for old books, runs a little shop in the Latin Quarter. Very different world from ours, you understand. The implication was clear. She doesn't belong. She's an embarrassment. The laughter this time was less polite, tinged with the casual cruelty of their privileged circle. In that moment, standing under the glittering chandeliers, surrounded by the empty opulence they prized so highly, something inside me snapped. The years of quiet endurance, the carefully constructed walls they cracked. It wasn't just dismissal anymore. It was public shaming. It was a deliberate attempt to diminish me, to reinforce my otherness, my perceived failure in their world. I met Antoine's mocking gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away or retreat behind my polite mask. I held it, letting him see the ice forming in my eyes. The ember of fury ignited into a cold, controlled flame. The shield wasn't enough anymore. It was time to unsheath the sword. You want to talk about different worlds, Antoine? I thought, the words forming like shards of ice in my mind. You have no idea just how different they are, and soon you're going to beg for entry into mine. I gave a tight, humorless smile. Indeed, Antoine, very different worlds. I turned back to Dr. Hansen, deliberately cutting him off. Lena, shall we continue our discussion elsewhere? The acoustics here are rather loud, leaving them standing there, momentarily thrown off balance by my lack of expected deference. Was a small victory, but the war council in my head had already convened. The time for passive endurance was over. The game had begun. Antoine, in his arrogance, had just dealt me the winning hand. The weeks following the spring ball incident were marked by a subtle shift within me. The quiet resignation was gone, replaced by a focused, almost predatory calm. The humiliation hadn't faded. It had solidified into purpose. Every dismissive word, every condescending glance I'd ever endured became fuel for the engine of or attack and the intricate plan now taking shape in my mind. While Élodie, the bookshop assistant, continued her unassuming routine cataloging acquisitions, recommending poetry, Sipping lukewarm tea in the back room, Élodie, the CEO, was marshalling resources, analyzing data, and preparing the field. The news I was waiting for arrived not through family gossip, but through the discreet, efficient channels of my corporate intelligence team. Dubois and Sons wasn't just struggling, it was teetering on the brink. Antoine's groundbreaking merger had collapsed spectrally, leaving the bank exposed and vulnerable. A series of risky investments, driven by Antoine's desperate need to appear successful, had backfired. Creditors were circling, quiet whispers of insolvency turning into worried murmurs within the financial community. The legacy my father prized so highly was crumbling under the mismanagement of the son he favored. Antoine was scrambling. I pictured him in his opulent office, the mask of confidence slipping, replaced by the pallor of fear. He would be calling in old favors, leveraging school ties, desperately seeking a lifeline from the shrinking pool of allies still willing to associate with the Dubois name. But the old guard was wary. Dubois and Sons was seen as a relic, its leadership incompetent. The traditional avenues were closing, one by one. Then, the inevitable happened. It arrived as a formal inquiry email, forwarded to my secure inbox by Jean-Pierre with a single, questioning annotation. Subject: Investment and Strategic Partnership Inquiry, Dubois and Sons. The sender was a prestigious financial advisory firm, acting on behalf of an unnamed client seeking urgent, substantial investment and technological integration. The attached prospectus, however, laid bare the desperation. It detailed the bank's precarious financial state glassed over with optimistic projections, but the red flags were unmistakable and outlined a vague, almost naive hope for a digital transformation partnership. The client was, of course, Dubois and Sons. Antoine. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the city lights of Paris gleaming beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Station F office. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of grim satisfaction. The predator sighting its prey. He didn't know it was me. He couldn't possibly conceive of it. To him, or attack would be an enigma, a powerful, faceless entity whispered about in tech and finance circles, known for its disruptive innovations, its aggressive growth, and its elusive, almost mythical founder. It represented everything his world wasn't: modern, agile, meritocratic, and utterly indifferent to bloodlines. He saw or attack as his last resort, his Hail Mary. He was approaching the sister he scorned, unknowingly begging for salvation from the very unbecoming distraction he and my father had ridiculed for years. The irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost suffocating. Jean-Pierre, I said into the intercom, my voice perfectly steady, regarding the Dubois and Sons inquiry. Yes, madam, have the advisory firm informed that their client's initial proposal is inadequate? A deliberate understatement. However, I paused, letting the silence hang for a moment. Or tech recognizes potential synergies in disruptive finance models. We might consider a meeting, strictly preliminary, to discuss potential strategic alignment if they present a significantly more compelling case. Make it clear that access is extremely limited. High-level principles only. Understood, madam. Shall I delegate the initial contact? No, I replied, the decision solidifying instantly. Filter all communications through your office, but I want the final meeting scheduled directly. And Jean-Pierre, madam, ensure the meeting takes place here, in the main boardroom, and inform me the moment it is confirmed. I will be handling this one personally. A beat of silence on the other end. Jean-Pierre was too professional to question my direct involvement in what seemed, on the surface, like a relatively minor inquiry compared to our usual dealings. But he knew my history, at least the broad strokes of my family's disapproval. He simply said, as you wish, madam. Now came the waiting, the preparation. It wasn't just about the business aspects, vetting the pitiful financials of Dubois and Sons, preparing the counterarguments, the points of leverage. It was a psychological preparation. In the evenings, after leaving the bustling energy of Station F, I wouldn't go straight home to my minimalist apartment overlooking the Seine. Instead, I'd retreat to the quiet sanctuary of the bookshop, long after the last customer had left. Surrounded by the ghosts of other people's stories, I opened a locked file on my personal tablet. It contained scanned copies of old emails, transcripts of voicemails, fragments of conversations logged away in my memory. Email from father. Circa my second year refusing law school. Élodie, your persistent fascination with these computers is deeply concerning. It reflects poorly on the family. You are wasting your potential on trivialities. Voicemail from Antoine. After I presented an early concept for a secure transaction algorithm, scoffing laughter seriously. Hello? Stick to art galleries. Leave the real business to people who understand it. This tech stuff is just a phase. Memory, Christmas dinner, 3 years ago. An uncle asking about my little job. Antoine interjecting smoothly. Oh, Élodie keeps herself busy rearranging shelves. Bless her heart. The polite, pitying smiles around a table. Each memory was a whetstone, sharpening the edge of my resolve. This wasn't just business. It was a reckoning. They had judged my passion as worthless, my ambition as unseemly. They had tried to confine me to a role defined by their narrow expectations. Now, they would confront the reality of what they had dismissed, embodied in the one person they believed they knew and controlled. I began to plan the meeting itself with meticulous care. The environment had to be precise. The main boardroom at Ortec was a masterpiece of understated power vest, minimalist, dominated by a single slab of dark wood table and cutting-edge holographic displays currently dark. It overlooked the heart of Station F, a constant reminder of the new world order in business and innovation. And then there was the question of what I would wear. Not the usual armor of my CEO persona, the sharp blazers, the severe tailoring. No, this required something different. I spent an afternoon consulting with a discreet, fiercely talented independent designer I knew. The result was a bespoke ensemble, a dress of deep emerald silk, cut with architectural precision. It was elegant, powerful, undeniably luxurious, but in a modern, self-assured way that owed nothing to the established fashion houses my mother and the women of her circle favored. It spoke of wealth earned, not inherited, of power wielded, not bestowed. It was the antithesis of the dowdy bookshop assistant, yet subtly distinct from the typical corporate uniform. It was purely me, the me I had built in the shadows. As the day of the meeting approached, a strange calm settled over me. The anger was still there, a cold, steady pilot light beneath the surface, but it was overlaid with an almost detached sense of anticipation. I felt like an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime, reviewing her lines, her motivations, ensuring every nuance was perfect. Jean-Pierre confirmed the meeting. Antoine Dubois would be attending, and adding a layer of delicious, painful irony, he would be accompanied by Mr. Dubois himself, my father, coming, cap in hand, to petition the daughter he had consistently undervalued. They had requested the meeting under the assumption they would be presenting to a board, or perhaps a senior executive. They had no name, only the formidable reputation of Ortec's leadership. The night before, I stood on my apartment balcony, overlooking the glittering expanse of Paris. The Eiffel Tower, that grand old dame, sparkled in the distance, a symbol of a certain kind of enduring Parisian identity. But my gaze was drawn towards the southeast, towards the sprawling, modern complex of Station F. A different Paris. My Paris. They thought they were coming to meet a stranger, a potential savior from the new world of tech and finance they barely understood. They were coming to meet their past, their judgment, their creation. They were coming to meet Élodie, not the one they thought they knew, shuffling amongst bookshelves, but the one they had inadvertently forged in the fires of their own contempt. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise. The air in the Ortec boardroom hummed with a controlled, almost sterile silence. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating the faint specks of dust dancing in the beams, the only sign of imperfection in the otherwise flawless space. I sat at the head of the long, dark table, my back to the entrance, gazing out at the sprawling campus of Station F below. The emerald silk of my dress felt cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the knot of tightly wound anticipation in my stomach. It wasn't nervousness, but the charged energy before a storm breaks. I heard the door open, the soft click echoing slightly in the large room. Jean-Pierre's calm voice, "Messrs. Dubois, please come in. The CEO will be with you momentarily." Footsteps on the polished concrete floor, the hesitant scrape of chairs being pulled out. I could picture them without turning. Antoine, attempting a fade of confident entitlement, probably fiddling with his expensive cufflinks, his anxiety likely manifesting as a slight sheen of perspiration on his brow. My father, projecting patriarchal authority, his back ramrod straight, his expression stern, masking his own unease at being in this unfamiliar, intimidating environment, seeking help from a world he fundamentally distrusted. I allowed the silence to stretch for a full minute, letting their discomfort marinate in the minimalist grandeur of the room. Let them feel small. Let them feel the shift in power dynamics before they even knew who held the reins. Then, slowly, deliberately, I swiveled the high-back leather chair round. The effect was instantaneous and deeply, grimly satisfying. Antoine's jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, grayish pallor. His eyes widened in stunned disbelief, flickering between me and the Aura Tech logo subtly etched into the glass well behind me, as if trying to reconcile to impossible realities. "Hello, Élodie," he stammered, the name catching in his throat. "WH what? What are you doing here?" My father's reaction was less overt, but no less profound. His rigid posture seemed to deflate slightly, his eyes narrowing first in confusion, then in dawning, horrified comprehension. The stern mask cracked, revealing a bewildered vulnerability I had never witnessed before. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. I offered them a cold, level gaze, devoid of the familial warmth they'd never truly extended to me. My voice, when I spoke, was the measured, professional tone of the Aura Tech CEO, not the quiet deference of Élodie Dubois, the daughter and sister. "Messrs. Dubois," I began, deliberately using the formal address, creating an immediate distance. "Welcome to Aura Tech. Please, have a seat. I understand you wish to discuss a potential strategic partnership." Antoine gaped, utterly thrown. "But you, the CEO, Aura Tech, the bookshop." He gestured vaguely, unable to form a coherent sentence. "My position at the old pages allows me a certain discretion," I replied smoothly, enjoying his sputtering confusion. "Now, I believe you have a presentation." My father found his voice, rough with shock, and something else, perhaps the first tendrils of humiliation. "Élodie, what is the meaning of this charade?" His tone attempted its usual authoritative bluster, but it rang hollow in this setting, my setting. "There is no charade, father," I said, meeting his gaze directly. The use of father was deliberate, a small twist of the knife. "This is my company, the one built on childish tinkering and unbecoming distractions." I let the echo of his past words hang in the air between us. "Now, shall we discuss the precarious financial situation of Dubois and Sons, or would you prefer to reminisce?" Antoine, jolted back to the grim reality of their purpose here, fumbled with his tablet, his hands visibly shaking. He attempted to launch into his carefully rehearsed pitch, but his voice was unsteady, his arguments disjointed. He stumbled over financial figures, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate, pleading undertone. He spoke of legacy, of tradition, trying to appeal to his sense of shared history that felt utterly alien in this context. My father sat beside him, silent and gray-faced, the weight of their predicament and the shock of the revelation pressing down on him. I listened patiently, my expression unreadable. I let Antoine dig his own grave, exposing the weaknesses, the outdated assumptions, the sheer lack of vision inherent in their proposal. He was floundering, appealing to emotion and legacy in a room where only data, innovation, and ruthless efficiency mattered. When he finally trailed off, The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the dark wood of the table. "Thank you, Antoine," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like sharpened steel. "Your presentation certainly highlights the challenges Du Bois and Sons is facing." I paused, letting the implicit criticism land. Then, the dismantling began. "Let's start with the fundamentals," I continued, my tone shifting from CEO to surgeon, dissecting their proposal with cold precision. "Your projected growth figures are based on outdated market assumptions. You've entirely failed to account for the impact of decentralized finance platforms, which are rapidly eroding your traditional client base." I gestured towards one of the dark screens. It flickered to life, displaying complex charts and data streams that illustrated my points with brutal clarity. "Your proposed digital transformation seems to consist primarily of cosmetic upgrades to your client interface, without addressing the fundamental inefficiencies in your back-end infrastructure or risk assessment models. Frankly, it's reactive, not strategic." I saw Antoine flinch at the technical jargon, words he clearly didn't fully grasp. My father simply stared at the screen, his expression unreadable but defeated. "Furthermore," I pressed on, my gaze sweeping over both of them, "your leadership structure appears resistant to the kind of radical overhaul necessary for survival in the current climate. There seems to be," I paused, choosing my words carefully, echoing their past dismissals of me, "a distinct lack of forward-thinking vision. It feels more like clinging to the past than building a future, almost like I tilted my head, letting the words hang, "a quaint hobby rather than a serious enterprise." Antoine visibly recoiled as if struck. My father closed his eyes briefly. The final blow needed to be personal, the culmination of years of hurt. I softened my voice slightly, but the edge remained. "You speak of legacy, Antoine, of tradition, but the legacy I see is one of complacency, of resisting change until the wolves are at the door. Your request for capital injection and partnership, it seems rather," I searched for the right word, dredging up one of Antoine's favorite dismissals from that awful night at the spring ball, "unstable. Wouldn't you agree? Perhaps a venture like this isn't really suited for someone of your disposition. Perhaps you should consider a path that is more comfortable, more aligned with tradition." Each recycled insult, delivered with calm, professional precision, landed like a physical blow. I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes, the dawning horror as they realized I was throwing their own condescension back in their faces. I leaned back in my chair, the final verdict ready. Or a tech invests in innovation, in bold vision, and in competent leadership. Du Bois and Sons, under its current structure and direction, unfortunately, presents none of these. I let the statement settle, absolute and final. "But more importantly," I continued, my voice dropping slightly, losing the corporate veneer and taking on a colder, more personal edge, "there's the matter of trust and respect. Values I prioritize in any partnership." I looked directly at my father, then at Antoine. I learned very early on, within my own family, that titles, lineage, and wealth mean very little if they aren't accompanied by integrity and the ability to recognize worth beyond superficial labels. I allowed myself a small, mirthless smile. I recall being told, quite clearly, that my interests were trivialities, nonsense, that technology was unbecoming for a Du Bois woman, that I should stick to dusty books and leave real business to others. I paused. "Well, messers, welcome to the real business built on those trivialities. Du Bois and Sons needs or tech. It needs the innovation you scorned. But or tech has no need for Du Bois and Sons." I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My decision is final. Or Attack declines the proposal for investment or partnership. Jean-Pierre will see you out." They sat there, frozen, utterly broken. The arrogance, the condescension, the lifetime of assured superiority all stripped away, leaving behind raw, gaping wounds of shock and humiliation. Antoine looked like he might be physically sick. My father, for the first time in my life, looked old, diminished, the carefully constructed edifice of his authority completely demolished. He couldn't meet my eyes. They rose wordlessly, defeated, and allowed Jean-Pierre to escort them from the room. They didn't look back. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me alone once more in the silent, sunlit boardroom. The tension drained out of me, leaving behind a profound emptiness. There was no elation, no triumphant surge of joy, just a hollow ache. The revenge, so meticulously planned, so clinically executed, felt necessary, but it wasn't sweet. It was the bitter medicine required to cure a long festering wound. News traveled fast in the incestuous circles of Parisian high society and finance. The story was too delicious, too dramatic to remain contained. The bookish, overlooked Dubois' daughter revealed as the anonymous powerhouse behind Ortec. The desperate plea from the failing family bank. The brutal, personal rejection. The fallout was swift and devastating. Without the Ortec lifeline, Dubois and Sons collapsed within weeks. It was eventually sold for scrap to a larger, more aggressive competitor. The Dubois name, once synonymous with quiet prestige, became a cautionary tale, whispered about at dinner parties and board meetings, a symbol of arrogance and obsolescence. My father retreated from public life, a broken man. Antoine, stripped of his inheritance and reputation, disappeared from the social scene entirely. Relatives who had once mimicked Antoine's mockery or offered pitying glances suddenly tried to reconnect, sending flattering emails, suggesting lunch. I ignored them all. Their validation meant nothing now. It had always meant nothing. The only validation that mattered was the one I had finally given myself. My mother reached out, tentative, hesitant, an email expressing regret, not for her actions, but for her inaction, for her silence. I was weak, Élodie. I see that now. I admired your strength, even when I didn't understand it, but I was too afraid to stand against your father and brother. It was a start. Perhaps, in time, that bridge could be carefully rebuilt, plank by painful plank. But the core family unit, the source of so much pain, was irrevocably broken, and I was free, standing by the window of my office, watching the sunset paint the Paris sky in hues of orange and violet. I didn't feel triumphant, but liberated. The heavy cloak of their expectations, their judgment, their disappointment, it was finally gone. I hadn't destroyed them for the sake of destruction. I had forced them to confront the truth of their own prejudice, to face the consequences of diminishing someone based on preconceived notions. Ortec continued to thrive, expanding, innovating. I channeled its success not into acquiring the trappings of the world I'd rejected, but into funding projects that resonated with my own values. Scholarships for young women in STEM, investments in sustainable technologies, support for artists pushing boundaries. Things my family would have once deemed frivolous or unimportant. The bookshop, the old pages, remained my sanctuary. I still spent quiet afternoons there sometimes, surrounded by the scent of paper and time. It wasn't a disguise anymore, but a reminder of where I came from and the quiet strength found in unexpected places. The most glittering facades can hide the deepest rot. True value lies not in lineage, inherited wealth, or societal approval, but in resilience, vision, and the courage to forge your own path, especially when others try to dictate it for you. Respect is earned through action and integrity, not demanded by birthright. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't about crushing your detractors, but about building a life so full and meaningful that their opinions become irrelevant echoes in the distance. You define your own worth. Never let anyone else steal that power. What did you think of today's story? Leave a comment below. If you liked this video, please like and share. And especially don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our interesting and exciting stories.